They said the kingdom of Varen would last forever. Its walls were carved from mountain stone, its throne lined with gold taken from 12 conquered lands, and its king Aldrich the Unbroken was feared from sea to sea. For 60 years, no enemy had ever crossed his borders. No rebellion had ever survived the night. His banners burned in every sunrise like the promise of a god that never dies. But every kingdom believes it's eternal, until one moment proves it never was. And that moment, in Varen, began not with an army, but with a servant girl carrying a tray of wine. Imagine an empire so powerful, its rulers thought betrayal was impossible. Imagine a single act of vengeance so fast, so perfect, that an entire dynasty fell before the torches could even be lit. This is the story of the servant girl who ended an age in 20 minutes. If you're new here, welcome to Time and Treachery, where we uncover the stories of loyalty twisted into ruin, and the whispers of revenge that shaped history's darkest hours. Make sure to subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reminder of how quickly power turns to dust. She was called Lyra, no last name, no lineage, just Lyra. To the nobles, she was invisible, a quiet figure who poured wine, scrubbed floors, and walked like a shadow through the marble corridors of Aldrich's palace. No one asked where she came from. No one noticed when her eyes lingered on the throne longer than a servant should. But Lyra had come from the ruins of the north, where Aldrich's army had left nothing standing. She had been a child when she watched her father dragged to the gallows, her mother buried in a burning house. The soldiers said it was justice. Aldrich called it peace. She called it the beginning. For 12 years, Lyra learned the silence of servitude. She learned how to pour wine without sound, how to bow low enough that her hatred never met another's eyes. And above all, she learned patience. Patience, as the king who murdered her family grew old and careless, surrounded by luxury, flattery, and fools who believed crowns could not crack. On the night of the Feast of Victory, the kingdom gathered to celebrate 20 years since Aldrich crushed his last enemy. The palace shone like fire, the air heavy with roasted meat, laughter, and music that masked the sound of destiny approaching. Lyra moved between nobles and soldiers, refilling goblets, smiling when spoken to, vanishing when dismissed. In her apron, she carried a secret no one would ever see coming. The king sat at the head of the table, his hands jeweled, his eyes tired but proud. Around him, his sons and advisors toasted his glory. 2 decades of peace, said the chancellor, a record no ruler will ever break. Aldrich smiled faintly. Peace, he muttered, strange word for what I did. Victory then, someone replied. No, Aldrich said, his gaze drifting to the grand doors. Only delay. Lyra heard those words. They were the first and last truth he would ever speak. She moved closer, refilling the goblets. No one noticed the slight tremor in her wrist, or how her other hand brushed the small silver clasp hidden under her sleeve. Inside it lay a shard of hemlock glass, a fragment soaked for months in the venom of a serpent found only in the northern wastes. Just one drop could stop a heart in moments. She had prepared it herself, whispering her family's names over it as though their ghosts could hear. When she reached the king's cup, she paused, for a breath, for a heartbeat. Then she tipped the vial. One drop fell, then another, then the last. The poison sank like a shadow through the wine. She placed the goblet before him, bowed, and stepped back. But fate is never that simple. Aldrich didn't drink immediately. He raised the goblet to toast his army's final boast before the poison could silence him. "To the men who built this peace," he said, standing, voice booming through the hall. "May their sons never know defeat." He drank, then a tremor, a cough, a flash of confusion that turned to pain. The room fell silent. The music stopped. The goblet shattered as it slipped from his hand, red wine spilling like blood across the marble floor. For one moment, no one moved. Then chaos exploded. Servants screamed. Guards rushed forward. His sons shouted orders that made no sense. Aldrich gasped for breath, his hand clutching his chest, his eyes darting wildly across the hall searching for something, someone, an answer. And when his gaze found Lyra, it froze. Recognition flickered not of her face, but of the truth behind her eyes. He saw the north. He saw the fire. He saw his own sins reflected in the calm of her stare. Aldrich collapsed. But that was not the end. It was only minute one. As the king fell, a cry rose outside the hall. Then another, the sound of steel. Before the guards could react, the grand doors burst open. Men in dark armor flooded in northern rebels, long thought extinct. But they hadn't crossed the border that night. They had been inside the palace all along, hidden among the workers, the musicians, the guards themselves. For months, Lyra had sent messages in secret, carved beneath the tray she carried, hidden in candles that melted away by morning. Her vengeance had been larger than poison. It was a plan that stretched across every corridor, every servant's hand, every shadow the nobles never bothered to see. Within minutes, the hall turned into a battlefield. Silver plates crashed to the ground, torches fell, the banners of Varen caught fire. Lyra didn't flinch. The rebellion had begun, and she stood in the middle of it, calm as a storm's eye. Outside, the kingdom's soldiers rushed to defend their walls. But the walls had already turned. The gatekeepers were among her allies. The watchtowers were unmanned. For the first time in a century, the mighty gates of Varen opened not to welcome a guest, but to let death walk in. The city erupted. Flames devoured the markets, temples, and gardens where nobles once whispered gossip. The people once silent under fear took up arms of their own, some for revenge, some for chaos, but none for the king. Lyra's plan had one purpose, not to conquer, but to erase. By the 10th minute, the royal family was either dead or fleeing through tunnels beneath the palace. By the 15th, those tunnels were caving in, collapsed by the same miners who had once been enslaved to build them. And by the 20th, the great throne of Varen stood empty under falling ash. The kingdom that had taken 60 years to rise was undone in 20 minutes. When dawn came, the smoke was still rising. Lyra stood on the steps of the ruined hall, staring at what she had done. The rebels cheered her name, but she didn't smile. She only whispered, "Now we're even." But vengeance, like fire, does not stop burning when the house is gone. It keeps consuming until there's nothing left, not even the hand that lit the spark. Within days, the rebels turned on each other. The generals fought for control. Cities broke apart. The kingdom died again and again in smaller wars. Lyra tried to restore order, but vengeance had no loyalty. It obeyed no crown. And the people who once saw her as savior began to fear her silence the way they once feared Aldrich as sword. Rumors spread that she carried the same poison still, hidden in her ring. ready for any who disobey. Others said she spoke with ghosts, that the souls of the North demanded more blood. In truth, Lyra wanted peace. But peace, once broken, is never the same. One night, as she walked through the burned corridors of the old palace, she found Aldrich's throne lying toppled among the ashes. She touched it gently, her fingers blackened by soot. In that silence, she realized something cruel. She had destroyed the man, the army, the walls, but not the kingdom. Because kingdoms are not just stone and power. They are the parts of us that believe control means safety, that vengeance means justice. And those survive every fire. Lyra fell to her knees. I thought I ended you, she whispered to the darkness. But you're still here in me. She rose, turned away from the throne, and vanished into the mountains before dawn. No one saw her again. Some say she built a small village in the north and lived the rest of her days as a healer, trying to undo the harm she'd unleashed. Others say she died that night, swallowed by the same flames she created. But centuries later, travelers still speak of the servant girl who ended a kingdom in 20 minutes, a story told to remind kings that no empire, no matter how strong, survives its own cruelty. And if you stayed with the story until the end, remember this: betrayal doesn't always come from the sword. Sometimes it comes from the silence of someone who has been listening too long. This has been Time and Treachery, where power ends and consequences begin. If you felt that chill of vengeance in this tale, leave a comment below. Was Lyra right, or did she become the monster she sought to destroy? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might remind you just how thin the line between loyalty and doom really is.